I've listened to the 911 call probably 10 times. What I keep coming back to isn't the words. It's how controlled the voice is. Most frightened people don't sound like that. They go high and fast, voice breaking mid-sentence. He's on the 42nd floor. He corrects himself, 40th, and someone is banging on his door. Then the line goes open. It held for 2 minutes and 14 seconds after Julian Mercer stopped speaking, before the dispatcher ended it and began the handoff to the responding units. The call came in at 3:07 on the morning of October 15th. The dispatcher on duty was a man named Anthony Marlo. He logged it and dispatched 2 units to Hargrove Tower in the financial district. By the time those units reached the 40th floor, the building was quiet. I found this case because of a leaked audio file that appeared on a private forum about 18 months ago. 47 minutes, no username, deleted within 6 hours, but not before someone had already pulled it. That file was a recording of a police interrogation. The man being questioned was Anthony Marlo. I didn't know who he was yet. By the end of those 47 minutes, I did, and then I went looking for everything else. The court documents, the forensic reports, the building access records, the original dispatch log. I've spent months with all of it. The Penthouse Mystery. Hargrove Tower, 42 floors, financial district. The penthouse on the 40th floor was a single unit, the entire floor, and Julian Mercer had lived there for 6 years on a lease that cost more per month than most people make in a year. He was 34 years old, no listed employer in the court materials, wealthy in a way that didn't attach itself to a job title. Lobby cameras covered every street-level entry, front, side, and service on a rolling 72-hour archive. Elevator access ran on a keycard system that logged every call with a timestamp and a destination floor. You couldn't reach the residential floors without a keycard or a building staff override, and every one of those events was recorded. The penthouse door had a reinforced steel frame and an interior deadbolt that could only be engaged from inside the apartment. No keyhole on the exterior face. October 14th brought a significant storm. You can see it in the lobby camera footage. The elevator log for that evening shows one ascent to the 40th floor, Julian Mercer's keycard, time-stamped at 9:02. Julian coming home. After that entry, the log shows nothing. No further ascents to the 40th floor, no descents from it. The lobby cameras, which investigators reviewed in full from 7 in the evening through the time responding units arrived, show no one entering or leaving the building between 9 at night and approximately 3:40 in the morning. Julian goes up at 9:02. No one else goes up. No one comes down. The building is, by every system on record, sealed. The call comes in at 3:07. A man's voice, the pounding underneath it, and then the open line. The dispatcher on duty, Anthony Marlo, logs it and dispatches 2 units immediately. The units arrive at approximately 3:40. They ride the elevator to the 40th floor. They knock. Nothing. They can hear the building around them. Ventilation somewhere in the ceiling. The background noise a large structure makes at 3 in the morning. Nothing from inside the apartment. They call for the building supervisor, and the supervisor comes up and looks at the door and tells them what the door is already telling them. The interior deadbolt has been engaged from inside. Officers breach the door. The smell reaches them, sharp and chemical, and underneath it something else, cedar or cleaning product, that none of them quite placed. The apartment is empty. The lights were off. The living area large and open. A couch, a low marble coffee table, a rug, kitchen visible beyond a breakfast bar, everything in its place. No broken glass, no overturned chair, nothing to suggest any physical event had taken place. They go through every room, the closets, the bathroom, the second bedroom converted into a home office, a walk-in storage room off the hallway. Julian Mercer is not there. No one is there. The apartment is undisturbed. The windows are sealed. Above the 30th floor, Hargrove Tower runs a climate-controlled system with non-operable windows, a permanent feature of the building's construction, not something you can open or override from inside the unit. The elevator log shows no descent from the 40th floor after Julian's keycard registered at 9:02. The lobby cameras show no one leaving. Julian Mercer called 911 to say someone was at his door, and then he wasn't in the building anymore, and there was no way out that the record could account for. The case opens as a missing persons investigation. 3 days produce almost nothing. No contact from Julian, no activity on his accounts, no sightings. His phone goes to voicemail. The forensics team goes through the apartment, finds the smell, identified in lab analysis as an industrial concentration cleaning compound, not sold for residential use, and very little else. No prints on the door handle beyond Julian's own. No useful trace. The lead investigator noted in her case file that the apartment had been cleaned with a deliberateness that didn't look like routine. At that stage, she didn't have anything to hang that observation on. Then, on the morning of the third day, the precinct gets a call. The man on the line identifies himself as Anthony Marlo. He says he's the dispatcher who took Julian Mercer's call that night, and he's been watching the news coverage, and there are things about how the building's systems work, about how a 911 call moves through dispatch, technical things he wasn't sure investigators had a full picture of, that he thought might be useful if he could walk someone through them in person. He just wanted to offer it if it would help. The investigator takes his name and number and tells him yes, come in. They'd like to hear from him. He comes in the next morning. Detective Russo, Sarah Russo, 12 years in homicide by that point, took him to an interview room. He walked her through the dispatch floor first. The overnight shift runs on a skeleton crew, about a third of peak staffing. They rotate off in staggered 20-minute intervals. One person steps away, comes back, the next one goes, so there's always coverage, but the floor is never at full capacity, and there are windows in the early morning hours where a given console is effectively alone. Overhead lights dimmed at midnight, standard policy to reduce eye strain over a long shift. By 3 in the morning, the primary light source is the monitors, amber for active calls, flat blue for standby, and the storm had cut out whatever ambient light might have come through the reinforced windows. When a call connects, the address and unit number resolve on the dispatcher's screen within seconds, a direct pull from the telecom carrier's subscriber database. High-priority flags surface automatically. The system records both channels independently. Every call is logged on a dual-channel audio record, the caller's line on one track, the dispatcher's headset mic on the other, both running independently from the moment the call connects until the line is closed from the dispatch end. Anthony was the only person on his bank of consoles when the call came in. His nearest colleague had stepped off for rotation minutes before. At 3:07, his board lit up. The address resolved in red, high-rise residential flag, financial district. Hargrove Tower, 40th floor. He connected the call, and Julian Mercer's voice came through his headset. Julian wasn't screaming. He spoke quickly. He kept his voice under control. Someone at his door. I don't know who it is. The phrasing came more than once, Julian returning to it each time. Underneath his voice, there was a steady, rhythmic pounding in sets of 3. A pause, then 3 again. Anthony opened the ticket. He worked through the standard checklist. Deadbolt engaged. Julian confirmed it. Alone in the apartment, he confirmed that too. Anthony told him to move toward the nearest interior room and stay on the line. The first units were dispatched at 3:07, 2 minutes into the call. For the next several minutes, Anthony held the line. He repeated the instruction to stay back from the door at regular intervals. Julian stayed on, answered when addressed, confirmed his position each time. The pounding continued in its sets of 3. At the console, Anthony watched the call timer and the unit tracker side by side. the responding units advancing on the map in the lower right quadrant of his screen, the timer running in the upper left. The audio compression on Julian's end narrowed everything down to a flat frequency band. What came through was the rhythm of the pounding, Julian's breathing, and the ambient noise of the apartment. Then the pounding got louder and closer. Anthony told Julian again to put distance between himself and the door. Then it stopped. Something came through the line, not from the door, from inside the room, low, compressed by distance and static into something almost unrecognizable. Flat. Then the line went open, not dead. The call didn't terminate. The connection stayed live, but Julian was gone from it. What Anthony had now was an active line with nothing on the other end, ventilation in the walls somewhere, the low electrical noise of a large building at 3 a.m, rain against the outside windows. He held the open line, 2 minutes and 14 seconds of ambient room noise before he closed it from his end and began the handoff. At this stage of the investigation, Anthony was a witness, cooperative, specific, consistent with the audio record on every point, presenting none of the gaps or reversals that investigators look for. The forensic findings came later. At the end of that section, Russo said that was a remarkable amount of detail for a 7-minute call. Anthony said that was what 12 years of dispatch did to you. The bad ones you carry word for word. The loading dock camera had been offline for 13 days before Julian Mercer disappeared. The city's infrastructure maintenance database logged a service flag on October 1st, resolved October 18th, 4 days after the call. The outage covered the night of the 14th exactly, and the loading dock camera was the only coverage on the building's freight entrance. The city runs a live infrastructure maintenance system, updated in real time, logging every outstanding service ticket for cameras, elevators, utilities, and access control equipment across every municipal contracted building in the city. It's not public-facing. The departments authorized to query it in real time are building code enforcement, municipal facilities, emergency management, and certain coordinating arms of emergency dispatch operations. Dispatch has that access for a practical reason, so that operators know in advance whether a camera or communication system at a high-priority location will be offline before they route a call there. The access log for that database is in the court documents. Inside the loading dock, there's a freight elevator on a separate track from the residential bank. No keycard required, no camera inside the car. Logs mechanical calls, timestamps, floor stops. But the log is maintained by the building's facilities contractor and isn't integrated with the main security system. Nobody requested that log in the first 72 hours. When they did, it showed a stretch of entries between 2:40 and 3:50 in the morning marked as service mode, which disables automatic logging. Placing the elevator in service mode requires a key, kept in an unlocked box in the facilities room, which is accessible from the loading dock. A route through the building with no camera, no keycard reader, and a log that had been switched off. The camera covering the entrance to that route had been offline for 13 days. Anyone with access to the city's maintenance database would have known that 2 weeks in advance. The audio went to the lab in the second week. In the first 48 hours, dispatch recordings are timeline material. You confirm when the call came in, verify the dispatch sequence, move on. Those questions were answered on day 1. The full forensic analysis came later. What the lab runs is an acoustic comparison built around a phenomenon called double encoding artifact accumulation. Live phone audio passes through one encoding-decoding cycle between the caller's device and the receiver. Compression, transmission, decompression. Recorded audio played back through a second device passes through that cycle twice. Each pass leaves a distinct digital trace. It's not audible, but it registers in the waveform data as a cluster of frequency anomalies above 16 kilohertz, above the threshold of human perception, where each additional encoding cycle deposits a measurable layer of artifacts that single-pass audio doesn't carry. In the first 48 hours, dispatch recordings are timeline material. You confirm when the call came in, verify the dispatch sequence, move on. Those questions were answered on day 1. The lab's report identified this pattern across the entire call. 22 seconds, consistent from the first sample to the last. Julian's fear was real, in conditions the lab assessed as consistent with a residential interior at some point before October 14th. But the call itself was a playback. Someone had loaded that audio into a VoIP account, a service that lets you route calls through any number, including numbers not registered to the account holder, and configured it to trigger an outbound call at exactly 3:07 on the morning of October 14th, routed through Julian Mercer's residential number. The account had been created 6 days before his disappearance. The account had been set up through a VPN relay, which means the creation log showed the relay's IP address, not the user's. Stripping that required a subpoena to the ISP hosting the relay's infrastructure. To obtain the subpoena, investigators had to file a sworn affidavit establishing the account's relevance to an active criminal investigation, which required having first established the VoIP account as material evidence, which required the completed audio analysis. The affidavit detailed the artifact findings, the account creation timeline, and the specific relay logs believed to contain the originating IP. The court issued the order. Under the subpoena's terms, the ISP had 15 days to comply. They produced the records in 11. The relay's internal log had the entry: the originating IP resolved through the ISP's subscriber records to a physical address, 4 Alderton Place, Unit 7C. It wasn't Julian Mercer's address. Russo noted it in the case file and didn't release it publicly. The strike plate score was identified in the initial breach photographs. When responding units breached the apartment, they forced the door, and forced doors leave marks on the frame, on the hinges, on the strike plate. Forensic personnel documented all of it in the first 48 hours, 41 photographs covering the door and the surrounding wall. It was thorough work, but the people reviewing those photographs were looking for evidence of an intrusion from the outside, because the working assumption at that point was still that Julian had engaged the deadbolt himself, that he'd been in the apartment when he locked it and then left through some route the investigation hadn't yet identified. The photographs were examined under that assumption, and the attention went in the wrong direction. What was actually there? A thin horizontal score on the interior edge of the strike plate, at the exact height of the thumb turn. Roughly 4 millimeters long, less than a millimeter wide. When forensic technicians re-examined the plate under a stereo microscope, the score's profile became specific. A slight inward curve along its lower margin. Fine parallel striations running perpendicular to the cut, with consistent spacing and depth across the full length of the mark. The striation pattern was characteristic of braided wire, consistent with cable used in certain low-voltage installation work. Under magnification, the tool marks bore no similarity to anything produced during the forced entry. They predated the breach. The technique requires a length of thin braided wire, flexible enough to thread through the doorframe gap, stiff enough to carry torque. The wire is threaded through at the height of the thumb turn, looped around the bolt mechanism, with both ends run back through the gap below and drawn under tension. The bolt rotates. The deadbolt engages from the inside. The wire is then withdrawn through the gap and removed. It leaves a score on the strike plate and almost nothing else. Execution requires exact knowledge of the thumb turn's position relative to the frame. The operation must be completed correctly on the first attempt in low or absent light. Investigators found the score in the existing photographs once they knew what they were looking for. They didn't know what they were looking for until someone told them that someone was Anthony Marlo. He'd come in on day 3 and spent the better part of 8 hours answering questions about how the tower operated, the dispatch floor's architecture, the audio logging setup, how the residential and freight elevator systems related to each other, how the building's security layout compared to others he'd worked with. In the course of that conversation, investigators had asked about access control vulnerabilities in high-rise residential buildings. Marlo had worked through the answer methodically. Keycard reader placement, camera coverage gaps, the freight system's separation from the main security infrastructure. The question of interior deadbolts had come up in that context, and within it, the question of what a thumb-turn mechanism actually prevents and what it doesn't. The braided wire detail had appeared there, framed as a known design vulnerability in hotel-style interior deadbolts that investigators might not be familiar with given how the thumb turn sits relative to the frame gap. A professional observation nested inside a long technical exchange. Julian Mercer was still missing. None of it located him. What it established was that the sealed room was not a mystery. It had been constructed to appear as one. And every element of that construction, the camera gap, the freight elevator, the deadbolt technique, had been described to investigators by Anthony Marlo on day 3. Accurately, in sequence. He had spoon-fed them the blueprint of a staged vanishing weeks before the forensic record confirmed it. Russo ran the second interview alone. Anthony came in the same way he'd come in 3 weeks earlier, on time, coffee from the place 2 blocks away, dispatch lanyard around his neck with the ID facing out. The room they used was smaller than the first. A table, 3 chairs, a recording unit on the wall. The session log timestamps it at 9:04 a.m. She let him get settled, asked if he wanted water. He said he was fine with the coffee, and she said that was fine, and she opened her folder. Then she put the first document on the table. A printout from the city's infrastructure maintenance database, the service flag on the loading dock camera. Logged October 1st, resolved October 18th. October 3rd through the 17th. Anthony pulled it toward him and read it. Then he said, "This is the camera gap from the follow-up brief." "That's right." "Okay, so." He set it flat on the table. The loading dock camera was flagged for service on the 1st and didn't come back online until after the 14th. I flagged that gap in my first interview because it was relevant to how responding units would read the building's coverage. I brought it up. He looked at Russo. "I raised it voluntarily." "You did? So the question you're asking is how I knew it was offline." The answer is the same as what I told you the first time. Dispatch has read access to the city's infrastructure maintenance database for operational reasons, so operators know in advance if a camera or communication system at a priority location is down before they route a call there. That access is documented. It's listed in the Dispatch Operations Manual and in the Interagency MOU with municipal facilities. You can pull both. Anyone on my shift that week could have looked up that camera's status. I happened to notice it because I run coverage checks on high-density residential buildings in my queue as a matter of habit. He slid the document back toward her. "That's not specialized knowledge. That's the job." Russo made a note, left the document on the table, and put the second one down next to it. The VoIP account registration record. Creation date, October 8th. The account configured to route a pre-recorded audio file through Julian Mercer's residential number on a scheduled trigger. The relay IP, and below it, the originating address the subpoena had returned. 4 Alderton Place. Unit 7C. Anthony looked at it for a moment. Then he said, "Walk me through how the subpoena return was produced." The ISP provided subscriber records tied to the relay's exit node. "Right, so, okay." He turned the document toward himself. This is a shared relay infrastructure. When traffic routes through a VPN relay, the exit node pools connections from multiple users through the same IP block. The ISP's subscriber record doesn't log individual session attribution in real time. It logs the block owner. To get a specific session resolved to a specific subscriber, you need a timestamp-correlated NAT table entry from the relay operator, not just the ISP's subscriber record. He looked up. Did the subpoena return include NAT table data? The ISP provided what was ordered. The address on this document could be any subscriber sharing that exit node during that session window. That's not a flaw in your investigation. That's how shared relay infrastructure works. He tapped the document. You'd need a second subpoena to the relay operator, not the ISP, requesting the session logs for the specific timestamp the account was created. Without that, this address is correlative. Russo didn't respond to that. She wrote something down, left both documents on the table, and put the third one down. The stereo microscope photograph of the strike plate, the score in high contrast. Below it, the lab's annotation, 4 millimeters in length, consistent with multi-strand braided wire in the 0.8 to 1.2 millimeter range, predating the forced breach. Anthony looked at this one the longest. What RAM did the breach team use? Russo said. That's in the incident report. I'm asking because it matters for the metallurgy. A standard 30-pound RAM generates a peak impact force in the range of 80 to 120 kilonewtons distributed across the door face, and when that force transfers to the latch hardware, it produces compression and shear on the strike plate simultaneously. It requires a hard enough hit. The lab's assessment is that the score predates the breach. The lab's assessment is based on grain deformation analysis under a specific interpretive framework. I'm not saying the analyst is wrong. I'm saying the physical process I just described is a documented alternative explanation, and it's directly relevant to whether you can rule out the breach as the source. He looked at her steadily. That's a legitimate evidentiary question. It belongs in front of a materials expert before it's treated as settled. Russo made a note, left all 3 documents on the table. She opened her folder, took out the last document, and placed it in front of him. A printed dual-track audio log. 2 rows running the full width of the page. The top row, the caller's line, Julian Mercer's residential number. The waveform showed the voice patterns, the pounding underneath, and the flat, open line reading for 2 minutes and 14 seconds before the connection closed. The bottom row was the dispatcher's headset mic track. Anthony's track. A straight line. Unbroken, from the moment the call reached his board to the moment the line closed. Muted before the call connected. Not opened once. Before Anthony said, "There's a protocol for muting during high-distress calls in low ambient floor conditions." His voice was level. If background noise on the dispatch floor risks interfering with the caller's audio, the operator mutes their outgoing channel to maintain line clarity on the caller's end. That's documented in the operations manual. You muted before the call connected. The board cues the call before the operator opens the line. There's a 3 to 5 second window between cue and connect. I would have muted during that window to make sure the floor was quiet before Julian's audio came through. That's standard. A 3 to 5 second window, Russo said. The log shows your mic was muted 31 seconds. Anthony looked at the document. 31 seconds, Russo said again. You told me you stayed with him the whole call. You told me you kept talking to him, kept him focused. She turned the log so it faced him directly. But your mic was off before the call connected. Russo didn't move. Then Anthony said. Anthony reached into his pocket, pulled out his municipal ID badge, and placed it face down on the metal table. He set his hands flat on the surface. He didn't offer an explanation. He didn't ask for a lawyer. "You can process me now," he said. He didn't say anything after that. He sat there, hands on the table, and waited for the cuffs. The second interview took place 4 days later. It ran for 2 hours and 40 minutes. He had been held in lockup since his initial confession, waiting patiently in his cell. He answered plainly, without hesitation, and he still hadn't asked for a lawyer. She dropped a thick stack of printed documents on the table. "We cracked Julian's laptop," Russo said. "We found the hidden ledgers and the offshore accounts. Julian didn't have a normal job because he was moving money on the dark web. He was laundering crypto for people who do not forgive debts, and it caught up to him." Anthony looked at the documents and gave a single, slight nod. "The timeline never made sense," Russo continued, "because the 911 call was a lie. The lab proved the audio was pre-recorded. The voice wasn't even Julian's. It was an impersonator holding a lower tone of voice to mimic him over the static. The strike plate proved the door was locked from the hallway using a wire. And your audio track proved you muted your headset 30 seconds before the call even connected, because you already knew you were going to be talking to an empty room." Anthony didn't flinch. He just sat there. "Julian wasn't taken at 3 a.m, Russo said. "He was killed shortly after 9 at night. The killers packed him up, wheeled him out the freight elevator, and wire-locked the door behind them. They created a locked room mystery on purpose. A red herring." She tapped the forensic photos on the table. "They thought an impossible locked door mystery would never be explained. They thought we would spend years chasing shadows. But they underestimated the forensics. They left the wire score on the strike plate, and they left the digital artifacts in the fake 911 call. We pieced together exactly how they slipped out undetected and made the room look untouched." She leaned forward. "The physical mystery is dead, Anthony. We know how they did it, but they needed you for the paperwork. Whoever ordered this hit needed a bulletproof, police-verified time of death so they could have a perfect alibi. And they needed a dispatcher to play along." Anthony looked at her. "They contacted me through an encrypted board," he said, his voice completely flat. "They offered me $250,000 in offshore crypto to route a fake call, mute my headset, and play dumb. It was a business transaction. You helped them execute a man for a paycheck. The organization that paid me has resources you cannot comprehend. They cater to the ultra-rich. They don't just sell assassinations. They sell the alibi. They pay dispatchers to log fake 911 calls so the state record reflects whatever reality their clients paid for. They paid me to route a call and keep the police staring at a piece of steel." Russo watched him. "If the alibi worked, why walk into my precinct 4 days ago? Why ask for this interview and hand yourself over?" Anthony looked at her, and for the first time, a cold trace of ego bled into his voice. "Because I watched your department hold press conferences. I watched you take pride in solving the impossible room. I needed you to know that the puzzle you spent weeks obsessing over wasn't a masterpiece. It was just a speed bump." He met her eyes, his expression returning to that terrifying, flat detachment. "You didn't catch me, detective. You were never going to. I came here because the audit is complete and it is time to close the ticket." Russo left to get water. Russo thought she had the whole picture. A cold, corporate timeline hack, a purchased alibi. Until 2 days later, when an anonymous tip directed police to a self-storage facility on Route 9. The syndicate wanted Julian found. They needed the state to officially autopsy him and cement their fake timeline into the public record. They found the HVAC case in the back left corner of Bay 14. It stood upright against the cinder block wall, a commercial-grade unit sealed with standard padlocks on all 4 latches. Julian Mercer was inside. The medical examiner's report, filed 11 days later, recorded no blunt force trauma anywhere on the body, no defensive wounds, no bruising consistent with restraint, no skin under the fingernails, But the body was wrong. Standard post-mortem blood pooling was absent. The skin was uniformly pale. When the examiner made the initial Y incision, there was no bleeding. Instead, the smell of cedar filled the autopsy suite. Julian Mercer's vascular system had been completely drained. In its place, the system had been filled with a commercially available industrial-grade cedar cleaning fluid. Product code 7741-C, sold in bulk to janitorial supply contractors. The examiner noted the precise volume, 4.7 liters. It matched the average human circulatory volume exactly. The veins hadn't collapsed. The internal pressure was perfectly maintained. The fluid was thicker than blood. It burned out the motor on the standard autopsy aspirator. The lab had to run the toxicology panel 3 times because their machines weren't calibrated for industrial chemicals. They found no sedatives. They found no anesthetics. The report noted the physical requirements for the procedure. It required surgical-grade bypass pumps. It required a sterile environment. It required a minimum of 4 hours of uninterrupted work to replace the fluid uniformly, without introducing air pockets. It didn't occur in Julian Mercer's apartment. The report flagged the finding for specialist review. That review is still pending. Anthony had called it a business transaction. He believed the syndicate only sold alibis to the ultra-rich. But a simple assassination doesn't require surgical-grade bypass pumps. A timeline hack doesn't require a meticulous preservation ritual disguised with industrial cedar fluid. Anthony had audited the timeline. He had kept the police staring at the door. Russo closed the file. The alibi was just a byproduct. The preserved body wasn't the target. It was just the empty packaging. And neither she nor Anthony wanted to know what the elite clients were doing with the 4.7 liters of missing blood.